Nobody could accuse you of shilly-shallying on the issues, as we illustrated in that piece that Kwame Holman did. You're very clear. You want to ultimately abolish the income tax. You want to bring all American troops home from foreign countries. You want to legalize drugs. Let's start with that, because the polls say it's such a big issue on many people's minds, the drug problem. What is the case, your case, for legalizing drugs?
The first thing is the best way to state it is we want to legalize freedom of choice in intellectual pursuits, freedom of choice in religious pursuits, and freedom of choice in what we take into our own bodies. And so therefore it's a principle of liberty. Most of our history we did not have anti-drug laws. They have only occurred since 1914. So we see this as something new. Prohibition of alcohol certainly didn't work. We don't like drug dealers. The drug dealer's out of business if you take away all the profits. The crime rate's double what it would be if you didn't have the drug laws. I, as a parent and a physician, have come to the conclusion that the worst thing you can do for the young people are have these drug laws. It literally encourages kids to be involved. It's a lot easier taking a job at $400 a day than $4 an hour in the drug business. So I think all these laws backfire. We want responsibility on the individual. We want responsibility on the family. We want responsibility on the church. We don't believe the drug laws work, but we can't brush off our personal responsibility to our children. We teach our children to watch out for the danger of automobiles, fire, and water. Why is it that we can't teach our children that drugs are very dangerous? When you look at alcohol and cigarettes, 450,000 people die a year from alcohol and cigarettes. We subsidize tobacco. The state governments sell the alcohol. And here it is. We are practically throwing the Constitution out the window with an obsession on the hard drugs. At the same time, the dealers need the laws this way. The terrorist nations need the prices up. And I'm sure the CIA doesn't mind too much either, because they wheel and deal in the drug trade too. So I think there's a definite reason for the drug laws to exist. And those who are anti-drug, which I am, many of them inadvertently become allies of the drug dealer by supporting these laws that are unenforceable and do a great deal of harm.
You want to cut out an awful lot of federal government activities. What would you keep in the federal government?
Well, we would keep what the Constitution tells us to keep, and that would be a good starter. You know, the purpose of our revolution, the purpose of the Declaration was to get big government off our backs. But we need a government to protect our liberty. We need a Justice Department. We need probably somebody to pay the bills in the Treasury Department. We certainly need a Department of Defense. But we don't need all the new departments. How many? There have been 10 new departments in this century. We've had 2 with this administration, the Drug Czar and the Department of Veterans Affairs. I mean, under the Republicans, you have more new departments than under the Democrats. So I would say that all the new departments, certainly in this century, we don't need. We need a government to protect our freedoms. That is what makes the world go round. That's what gives us our prosperity, and it's also what gives us the peace that we all want.
A very big part of this country now is something you say you would like to get rid of, along with bringing the troops home from abroad, and that is transfer payments, more commonly known as the welfare system. What would you put in its place? Who would look after the poor and the unemployed and so on if you did all that?
Who's looking after the poor today? We have more poor than ever before. We have more people without medical care. We have more people in the streets after 50 years of the welfare business. The Soviet Union have decided that socialism doesn't work, and they're looking toward capitalist answers. We have discovered that welfarism doesn't work, and we have 2 candidates out there only advocating more government. So I would say if you really care, if we care about the poor, what we must do is recognize that a free market provides for the poor, that protecting liberty provides for the poor. That if we get rid of the welfare system, the biggest fraud that's going on is this idea that welfare helps the poor. The poor get thrown a few crumbs and the welfare goes to the rich. The military-industrial complex makes most of the money. The dictators overseas who get our foreign aid, the bankers who benefit from all the international banking schemes that go on. So the little guy is always voting for welfare. He gets a few crumbs, but they collect enough money to give every poor family $45,000 a year, and the poor aren't getting anything. So what we would say is we'd stop all the welfare, and since 80% of it goes to the wealthy, the poor would have a much better chance of being helped. There still would be need. There would still be a couple % of the people.
Would you leave it at private charity? Or
yes, we would, because we do not sacrifice the principles of freedom that creates the greatest amount of wealth and abundance and takes care of 98% of the people. Why sacrifice the principles of freedom? What we would do then is we would have to do this through voluntary means. Last year, we donated $198 billion last year. The welfare state has only been around for 50 years and is a total failure. It's causing runaway inflation. It's causing a huge deficit. It's uncontrolled government. And we face serious times ahead because both Republicans, all they know how to do is run up the deficits. The real deficit this year was $238 billion when you add the off-budget items.
You say that the economy is on the verge of a cataclysm. That's a very strong word. That's worse than a disaster. Now, what do you mean by a cataclysm?
Well, I think that the debt can't be paid. We have a $2.6 trillion national debt. Corporate debt is higher than ever before. Personal debt is higher than ever before. Our international debt to foreigners is $600 billion. It can't be paid. Therefore, the burden, it has to be liquidated, and it's liquidated in one of two ways, either through default and shrinkage of the money supply, and that is deflation, or it's liquidated through inflation. And everything I've learned on the banking committee in 8 years in Washington is that they will always resort to inflation, just as we have sustained the bank failures here. 800 bank failures during the Reagan administration is all maintained by the increase of supply of money and credit, which means you hold it together for a little while longer, then eventually there's a financial calamity and financial collapse, and the bills will have to be paid. The tragedy is the young people will have to pay.
Dr. Paul, our time is up. Thank you very much for joining us.
Enjoyed being on here. Thank you very much.